All right, Brad. Here we go, baby. So, welcome to the Growth by Shawn podcast. Appreciate you being on here, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to chat it up today.
Yeah, I mean, just from the get-go, I mean, I've listened to your story. I've taken the wind away from people before by, doing my research and sharing a little bit about them. And I'm like, I don't want to steal any of your thunder. So, for anyone that doesn't know you, um, as much detail or depth as you want to go into, I know that you've had a lot of ups and downs, a little bit of your story, and we'll go from there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I started a company called Debt Free Dad here about 9 years ago, which is crazy to even think that because it's gone by so fast. And uh, I struggled with a lot of the same types of financial challenges a lot of other people have struggled with over the years, especially in my late teens through my early 20s and early 30s, and got stuck in the same rat race that most people are stuck in with paycheck to paycheck living, credit card debt, car payments, student loans. Got myself into houses I couldn't afford, and just lived that paycheck to paycheck life. No money in the savings, kind of that you only live once life mentality. And the older I got, it just seemed like the more stressful finances got for me. And it was constant worrying, losing sleep at night. How am I going to pay these bills? How am I going to pay these car payments? And then I had my first child, Noah, and that's when things got even more scary because now I got this little human I got to take care of, and it's like dad's broke. I'm worried about how we're going to pay for daycare and feed this kid, and I'm just a financial wreck. I'm an absolute mess. And my first marriage sadly ended in divorce, and it wasn't entirely the reason, but money definitely played a role in that relationship's failure. Um, and doing what I do now and coaching thousands of people over the years, money and personal finance are one of the top fights and arguments that a lot of couples are having too. So it's good to know that I wasn't alone in that and that it's a constant struggle with relationships. But it was during that divorce, I lost my first house. Neither one of us could afford the mortgage. It was during that 2010, 2011, housing bust that had happened. And we ended up purchasing our home at a much higher price than what we could sell it for, which is crazy today's world because the real estate market is going nuts. But, back then it was the complete opposite. So we ended up losing our house to foreclosure. Luckily was able to short sell it, but it was that kind of moment or that experience that really, I guess, opened my eyes to the house of cards that I had built in my life. And it showed me that just one card at the bottom can just come out and everything can just fall apart very, very quickly. And so it was a real wake up call. It was one of those moments where it's like you feel like in the moment, like this is the worst thing that could happen to me. But looking back, it was one of the best things that could happen to me because it really was what pushed and drove me to start making some serious changes in my financial life. So I eventually started getting my way out of debt. It took me about 4 or 5 years to do it. I paid off about $45,000, and since then I've been about it's going on 11, actually it's over 11 years now. I've been debt free outside of my mortgage. And crazy enough, I didn't really do all of this to start a business like this. It was just something that kind of happened on accident. And that's why I say, looking back at that, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me because I never would be doing this now, which is pretty cool. But along the way, a lot of people just started asking me for help. I started sharing my story and just sharing, I actually have money in the bank. I am actually sleeping better. I feel better. I was taking care of my health better. Like it just had this ripple effect on my life. And so I'm just sharing that with my coworkers, with my friends and my family. And many people know that a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, but money is a very taboo topic. A lot of people don't talk about it. And so they privately were coming to me and saying, hey, I was struggling with a lot of the same things that you were struggling with. Can you help me? And so I just started helping people and coaching people on the side for free. I wasn't even really doing it as a business. It was more or less just like, here's what I learned. Go do this. They'd come back to me. I coached them a little bit more. And I eventually just fell in love with that process of just helping people improve their lives. It wasn't so much the financial side. It was just this ripple effect that it has in your life that people were coming back and saying, dude, my relationship is better. Like I got a raise at my job. I'm getting promotions because I'm able to focus more at work. And, it's just having this amazing effect on my life. And that's when I was like, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could start a business that actually helps people with this. And I started very part time, eventually just went to more part time because I was debt free. I was able to just kind of step away from my salary. I was able to say, hey, I don't need so much of this money. I'm going to go after my dream now. And after about it was like about 9 to 10 months, I replaced my full time income. And I've been doing this full time now for, man, it's going on 8 or 9 years now. So it's been a wild ride, and couldn't be more thankful for the stuff that I get to do today.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations, of course. And I think like the biggest thing that many people won't realize about just that story is the leadership component of it, right? It's one thing to say something, it's another thing to do it. And that's when people are going to want to follow in the steps that you take. And so we can go and start any single business that you want. But as soon as you start to embody what you're preaching and can show people the proof is in the pudding, hey, this is what I've done, this is what worked for me, more people are going to want to follow you.
Right.
And so what I think would be helpful for us is, especially when we're talking about debt, your view of like what good debt is and what bad debt is to kind of lay the foundation here.
Yeah. So, I mean, me personally, and again, everyone can have their opinions on this, but me personally, how I look at it is all debt is bad if you can't pay it. It doesn't matter what
Yeah.
it is, right? And that's one thing that's funny about this whole argument is some people will say, well, real estate or mortgage debt isn't bad. Well, have you ever been in a situation where you can't pay it? Because then it's not so much fun.
Hmm.
Right? So you do have to be careful, but I do agree that there is a line. And I
Hmm.
think for most people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're not living paycheck to paycheck because they're leveraging debt and investing in real estate. They're living paycheck to paycheck because they have too high of car payments, because they
Hmm.
are over leveraged with credit card debt, because they've made some bad decisions. And I get, in today's world, in the economic times that we're in, there are other factors that are playing a role and that are really putting some stress on the wallet in the home. There's no question about that. But we also have to be willing to take accountability and look at our own situation and say, what do I have control over? So when it comes to good debt and bad debt, yeah, I think for most people, it's more of that consumer side where a lot of people are struggling. Most people who come to me aren't saying, Brad, I'm struggling because I own 4 rental properties. They're coming to me because they're saying, I have 15 credit cards and I have 2 car payments that are killing our cash flow. And I've got these student loans that I ended up not even using the degree that I'm in. And now I'm in a job that doesn't necessarily even help me pay a lot of my bills. So there's a lot of different things going on, but none of them are really on the investing side of things. It's mostly on consuming side of things.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think that that's just that first step of like that personal responsibility. We've got all of these different factors to things, right? Even for me, like single guy, but I'm paying $100 a week for food, right? $400 a month. And
Yeah.
depending on where you're at, it's a little, it's a lot. But I mean, just for eating for one person, I mean, imagine someone having a family, like it's a lot different. And
Yeah.
one
Our
of the
grocery
things,
bill here is $1,400 a month. So I'm familiar. I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
It's
and I
crazy.
know like you've touched on this too, where I think I heard a stat that either you had said or when you had done your podcast with Larry, he had said over the last 4 years or so, it's like grocery bills over a year have increased by $11,000 on average, something absolutely insane,
It's insane.
right?
Yep.
And so one of the things that sticks out to me too is this car payment, right? That's one of the biggest things that you touch on. We can go into credit card, 30% interest, XYZ, right? But like the car payments, $700 average. What is the first step that someone's doing where they went and they bought whatever car, it's $700 a month. They know that they shouldn't have, for lack of a better term, but they did. Now, what do you do? Where do you even start? Right?
Yeah, and that is the hardest part. And this is why we talk about this so often. And we are just, in this country, we love our cars. Like, there are two things, Shawn, that will piss more people off on social media if we create content. It's credit scores and
Hmm.
cars. And people just get up in arms about this topic. And the reality is, the hard part is once you get yourself into that new car, and not every new car, but most new cars, it's so hard to get out of it because cars depreciate so rapidly. Now, again,
Hmm.
I know when COVID happened, we went through this kind of little bubble almost where the new and used car market was kind of up and down and crazy and all over, things that we had never seen before.
Hmm.
But that market is quickly correcting itself. And
Hmm.
there are cars now sitting on the market and on these showroom floors and in these parking lots for much longer than they used to. And so you have to be understanding of that when that new car that you bought that was already probably in an inflated price because they were over sticker in a lot of cases, that car is not worth nearly what you probably owe on it.
Hmm.
So the sad reality for a lot of people is you can't really do a whole heck of a lot because banks aren't going to probably refinance it because they know you've got negative equity into that car. In a lot of cases, you got to sit on it and you got to pay extra on that loan and you just got to commit to yourself and say, in the future, we're never going to make this decision again. And that is a hard hard lesson to learn.
Yeah.
And this is why we talk about it. We just had Chad, and Chad is really big on TikTok right now. I had him on my podcast. His episode is about to release on the Debt Free Dad podcast here in the upcoming weeks. But he talks about this all the time too. He's a mortgage lender,
Hmm.
and he's like one of the number one reasons why people don't get approved for mortgages is car payments. And so if you think about it, like we just mentioned good and bad debt, we're taking a bad debt, a depreciating asset, and we're crushing our cash flow and the opportunity to put that money towards something that is an appreciating asset, something that's going
Hmm.
to grow like a home.
Hmm.
And that's what we need to get away from. And some people will say, well, what are we supposed to do? Car prices just keep going up and up and up. And I totally agree. But that doesn't mean that you have to follow what everybody else is doing. You can do some things differently.
Hmm.
And it's also crazy to me, Shawn, that there are so many people out there that think that you can't get a good car for even less than $10,000 right now. There are
Yeah.
so many of them out there. Heck, one of my cars right now is a 2006 Chevy Silverado, and I've been debt free now for 11 plus years. Now, I do have two newer cars than that, but I bought that truck for $7,000 4 years ago,
Hmm.
and it still only has about 120,000 miles. I could sell it for almost the same price, if not a little bit more than what I actually paid for it 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think people get into this mindset with cars of safety, reliability, and also a lot of people, Shawn, are just plain broke and they can't afford the repairs on a used car. So what do? They fall into this mindset of, well, I might as well get the new car with the warranty because then I don't have to worry about the maintenance. Well, you're paying the maintenance. It's called depreciation. And
Yeah.
most new cars in the first year depreciate 25% in the first
Hmm.
year alone.
Yeah.
So if you take that total value of whatever you paid for that car and take out 25% off the top, that's what you've just lost in the first year on that car. That is the maintenance that you could be paying on a
Yeah.
used car, which, is insane to me. And, one of the other arguments, Sean, people will say too is, well, I'm going to have to, repair a used car and it's just going to be way more expensive. Never in my lifetime have I ever paid on average $700 a month to maintain any of my vehicles that are
Hmm.
used and paid for.
Yeah.
But we get into this broke mentality. We get into this anchor bias that new cars are the only way. And there's so many people who are living paycheck to paycheck because of these new cars. A lot of people are saying, why can't I save more money? Why can't I get out of debt? Why can't I get ahead? It's parked in your garage or in your driveway. I guarantee it.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, here's the biggest thing that I want to take away, right? The paycheck to paycheck living. And this is one of the questions that I've had that is burning for me to hear this from you, right? Do we have, and I believe that the nuanced answer is going to be both, right? But is this an income problem for most people, or is this a spending problem for most people? Where do we start?
Well, I'm not going to argue the fact that wage growth is definitely a challenge.
Hmm.
We all know that that is something that needs to change and be addressed, especially with inflation, right?
Hmm.
But even today, with so many people, and again, not everybody, you can't throw everyone in the same bucket because for some people, they genuinely are budgeting, they genuinely are trying really hard, they genuinely are doing all the things right, but because of the way expenses are, because of how high costs, because of their income, they don't really have any wiggle room,
Hmm.
right? But for a lot of other people, middle income earners to middle to higher income earners, they do have some opportunities to make some changes. And we see this all the time within our Roots membership and the people that we help. These are normal, everyday people making normal incomes that come in and get help from us. They go through our program. We teach them how to budget. We teach them how to save more money. We teach them how to get out of debt the right way.
Hmm.
We show them really kind of more of the important parts, which is changing their mindset, their habits, their behaviors, their choices. And with all of that stuff combined, they are making some incredible progress. I just had Nicolette on our podcast. She joined our membership back in October, and within about 7 months, she had saved and paid off over $10,000. And this is someone who makes normal income. And
Hmm.
she said, before I joined this, I I tried everything. There was nothing I was doing that was working. But
Hmm.
then magically, 7 months later, she's saved and paid off 10 grand.
Yeah.
So we're seeing normal everyday people do this. It's just you got to be willing to work with some new tools. You
Yeah.
got to be willing to take your broken glasses off, put on some new lenses, and look at things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to do that, you can make better progress. Now, is everyone going to make that same kind of progress? No, we can't guarantee that, but we
Mhm.
can say that you can do better, and a
Yeah.
lot of us can.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing that age old statement of if nothing changes, nothing changes, right?
You
And
got it,
it's
right?
it's the same thing. That's all it is, right? And so this is this burning thing where it's this mindset component of this scarcity mindset. And one of the biggest things is how emotionally like we make decisions or spending habits, right? How emotional is even in terms of like marketing and everything like this. And so how can once you have that self-awareness of like, okay, this is the pattern that I'm in that I emotionally spend on XYZ, how can you start to retrain your brain or at least become more aware of, okay, this is what I'm spending money on emotionally. How do I get out of this? How do I break out of this pattern?
Yeah. I think one of the best ways to do this is to really get serious about what you want in your life and what that looks like. I think a lot of us struggle with impulsive and wasteful spending because we really don't have any clear direction as to where we're going, what we want, what that's going to look like. And when
Mhm.
we don't have that, you mentioned marketing, Sean. Marketing is just too good nowadays. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it is fascinating to me. I'll sit back and I get overcome by marketing too. We're all human, right?
Yeah.
They're just good at it. But it's amazing to me how they can get you to spend money that you didn't even plan on spending, or even
Mhm.
get you to go into debt with money you don't have
Mhm.
to buy something and you didn't plan on doing it.
Yeah.
And I think, we always talk about, financial education and stuff in schools. And I think one of those has to be a part of this is like understanding marketing and how they're using marketing to get you to buy things too, because it does affect your finances.
Mhm. Yeah. And so even like especially for parents, what are you telling most parents or teaching most parents? How can you help the parents instill in the children that, hey, this is happening, or, this is
Yeah.
how we're going to shift things. And so that way they're not in that same position that a parent might be in right now.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to your last question because I
Yeah.
don't think I did your audience well on that one. Is
That's,
set short-term and long-term goals is what I was getting at as far as going in the direction of where you want to go. It really get clear, like short-term, like what do I want to get done? If I don't have a savings, like let's first build like a small savings account. Put
mhm,
3 grand in it, right? If you have credit card debt, like let's make a goal to pay down your credit card debt. If you want to look at long-term, maybe it's buying a house, maybe it's moving to a different town, maybe it's getting a different job and you need to pay off debt because your new job that you want maybe doesn't pay as much of a salary, but it's going to be something you're really passionate about. Like if you really sit down and finally just get clear on what you want, it's amazing how much money you won't spend because you really want to get to that goal. But again, when you don't have those, it's easy just to say, yes, I'm going to buy that because that makes me feel good.
mhm,
And that's going to make, I'm not really happy right now. So this purchase can make me feel good for just a little while. And then it's the next purchase. Then it's the next purchase. Right. So it's really establishing those good short-term, long-term goals. And once you have those that you really believe in, you'll see a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of wasteful and impulsive spending go away.
yeah.
And it'll really, really help. And as far as, your kids,
Mhm,
um, I think one of the best things that we can do as parents is just do it for ourselves because I think your kids are watching you all the time. They're
mhm,
watching you at the store. They're watching you how you talk about money. They're hearing how you talk about money. So I think when it comes to a lot of what you can teach your kids about habits with money is a lot of how you're going to handle your money.
mhm,
And I think all teaching about money is obviously going to be age appropriate. Like I've got a 14-year-old and I've
mhm,
got a 5-year-old right now. And how I teach both of them about money is completely different. Like my 14-year-old, he's cutting grass and making cash this summer right now, which I think is really cool.
yeah.
So I'm already talking to him about budgeting and working through that. He's been, wanting to buy these crazy shoes. Like he's into these shoes and he wants to blow his whole bankroll on these shoes. And it's like, dude, once you get X amount of money in your savings account, then buy those shoes. But
Mhm,
don't blow all your money and have nothing left because something's going to come up that you're going to need money for and you ain't going to have it. And now you're going to miss out. And now this is teaching him like when you're an adult, dude, you can't go blow all your money because if an emergency comes up, dude, you ain't gonna have any option but to go into debt, and that's not going to be an option. You need to protect yourself from that.
mhm,
So I'm sharing these things with him early, and just by going through some of these basic things, and then when he gets a real job, not that this isn't a real one, but
yeah.
when he gets an actual paycheck,
Mhm,
I'll sit down with him. We'll open up a bank account with him. I'm going to be opening up a kid's Roth IRA for him. I'm going to start
mhm,
showing him, like, hey, we're going to start putting money away, even if it's, $25 a month into this
mhm,
Roth IRA. We're going to start doing some of these things so that way it starts creating those habits early. But I think for a lot of kids, And parents, I think it really kind of comes down to if we manage our money right, if we work through this stuff right, they're going to see all of those things. It's
Mhm.
like having a good marriage. Have a good marriage and you'll teach your kids how a good relationship should work and look like and feel like, right? And it's the same, kind of the same thing with, with your money.
Yeah.
If you model those appropriate habits and those behaviors, those are going to obviously hopefully drip down to your kids and they'll hopefully start doing some of those things too.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think that that just goes back to the point that that we collectively had made in the beginning of just like those leadership qualities, right? It's and this is going to sound worse than it is, but like it's monkey see, monkey do, especially when it comes to your children. They're not going to do what you tell them to do always,
Yeah,
right?
right.
They're going to do
Hardly ever.
they're going to do what you do, right?
Right.
And so um what I really want to bring up here is you've talked about saving, and when I'm looking at like financial planning, right? I'm looking at three different categories of investing, saving, and clearing debt.
Mhm.
Now, from your perspective, is it best to do all three at once? Do one, then the next, little by little, a snowball effect?
Yeah.
Where are your thoughts in terms of those three? And of course, this is nuanced in terms of, well, how much debt do you have? Um, do you have anything saved? And so I understand that we're generalizing here,
Yeah.
but just for the common consumer that's intaking this here.
Yeah, I think one of the first things for sure is to establish just a savings in general. Right now, 63% of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency expense without going into debt for it. That's
Mhm.
just that's just too big of a number. We need to fix that. And one of the number one ways to stay out of debt is obviously to have some sort of a cushion to fall back on. This is one of the things that the financial industry has done a great job on is, well, credit cards are for emergencies. No, they're not. They're for people who just haven't planned appropriately. So what we want to do is just get yourself a savings established. And I mentioned that $3,000 earlier. Put 3 grand into a savings account first and foremost before you pay off any extra debt, before you invest any more money. And that way, this prevents you from continuing to use debt. It breaks the habit of using debt and it allows you to attack the debt that you've already built.
Mhm.
Right. So that's first and foremost. And for most people, when it comes to debt, it, most people are going into debt because it was just a lack of planning. People will say, "Well, I needed new tires on my car. It was an emergency, Brad." No, actually, that wasn't. You knew you were going to need new tires at some point on your car. You
Yeah.
just didn't plan for it right, or your kids are going back to school next month. No, we just didn't plan for that. That happens the same time every single year. So we just need to start doing a better job of what's coming down the pipeline, planning, and then also having a backup savings account for the things that do show up. And that way we can just use that emergency fund and not have to go into debt. Once you kind of have that built, then I suggest just aggressively start paying down your debt, especially if we're talking like high interest credit cards,
Mhm.
or high interest debt. I mean, these things are paycheck killers. Now, when it comes to lower interest debt, like some people say, well, Brad, I have a car payment, but my interest rate because they got it maybe a couple years ago before interest rates went up, it's really low. Should I, stop investing to pay that off? In some of those cases, I would say, no, I wouldn't stop investing for that because it's such a low interest rate. But when you're starting to look at some of these credit cards that are, 20, 24, 29%, it's like we got to get this stuff paid off.
Mhm.
And this is why I suggest like if you're investing at the same time and trying to pay down like say like things like credit cards, I would actually stop investing
Yeah.
and try to put all of that on credit cards as fast as you can to get that stuff taken care of. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, let's say you have a credit card and that has 29% interest on it. Nobody can guarantee you in the stock market you're going to get 29% interest on your investment. But
Yeah.
what we can say is by paying off that credit card, we're going to put 29% right back in your pocket because you're no longer going to have to pay on that debt that you no longer owe.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a win-win of focusing on that. So I think once the majority of your debt is paid off, especially high interest, then I would heavily focus on more on the investing side and then beefing up like your emergency funds.
Yeah. And I think like especially with like the saving, I think I read a statistic too to piggyback off of you that if you have more than $4,280 in a savings account, you're wealthier than 50% of the world.
Yeah,
Or
it's
at
crazy.
least the US, something
Yeah, it was
like that.
something, and I heard a salary one. I think it was over, and it was a little over 30,000. If you make over $30,000 a year, um, you are in the top 1%. I
Yeah.
heard, and
Yeah.
that which is insane. Now I get for people in the United States, they're like, well, yeah, but here that don't pay for much. I get it, right?
Yeah.
But that's just it's mind boggling when you look at it that way.
Yeah. Now we've already talked a lot about credit cards and like would you go and change some because I think that one of the issues especially for me was it's so easy to access a credit card very young,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and so how can we go about it aside from just like an education standpoint? Because someone listening to this, you got an 18-year-old kid that's listening to this, awesome. Maybe you don't go get a credit card right now. Maybe you do. This, I mean, at least from my end, it's not financial advice, right? But if you're someone that, has a great mindset and, you spend $100 a month on the credit card and you pay it right off, all right, great, build some credit. But how could we start to change, or would you change even the accessibility of getting a credit card, from such a young age?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we live in a world where credit cards aren't going to go away. They're going to get,
Hmm.
it's just going to become more wildly acceptable. I mean, it already is. I mean, you look at all the easy ways now you can pay for things. You can use your phone. I mean, it's just going to get more and more sophisticated. So I don't think we could ever get away from it. But what I think we do need to do is be able to teach number one how they work and how you can get stuck,
Hmm.
um, how they win and how they use interest against you
Hmm.
when you could be using that same method to build your own wealth. But a lot of people don't understand how that works. So having that conversation of what compound interest looks like, because the credit card industry is just using that against you.
Yeah.
So I think it does come all down to proper education, and not just in the schools. I think a school is a secondary source, but I think it needs to happen at home. Like we need to have these conversations with our kids and show them how these tools work. Now, again, they make it really cool and awesome and so much fun with this advertising and all this messaging that's out there. And of course, then you see other people using it, your friends, your family, social influence then gets kicked in, and it's just easy to swipe. And there are so many people that I've interviewed on my podcast that have been through our membership that have gone through that and they
Hmm.
just got wrapped up in the credit card game.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it just comes down to properly educating our kids, and I think it really does start at home. And I think this is where a lot of us are missing the boat in our families is that we're not sitting down and teaching our kids basic budgeting, basic savings, basic
Hmm.
just personal finance knowledge. And sadly, it's because a lot of the parents don't even quite understand how all of it works. So we are just pushing these kids out into the world and we're letting the financial industry basically teach them, and they just want to teach them to be in debt.
Yeah.
So, we just have to be careful about sending them out that way and really educating them at home. And I think that's the best thing that we can do is have those conversations.
Yeah, especially with those conversations, like the first thing that comes to mind, right? When I think money, I think sex sometimes because they're both taboo topics,
Yeah.
right? And so it can be difficult for a parent to go and educate their child on money. So how do we make this so that it's less taboo and so that more people are actually talking about it?
Yeah, and we start by having these conversations, Sean. I think this is where it starts. This is one of the reasons why we do our podcasts. One of the reasons why our business exists is to be able to have these open conversations. You brought up sex. I heard a statistic once that people are more willing to share their deepest, darkest sexual desires than what the amount of credit card debt that they
Oh my
have. It's
God.
just crazy.
Yeah.
But that shows you how much emotion, shame, embarrassment there is associated to our money and mismanagement of money.
Mhm.
Um, so it's tough because it is such a taboo topic. It
Mhm.
really is. But I think by having these conversations, by being open about it, by me being transparent, because again, I think, one of the things that separates us from a lot of other financial gurus out there is that, Sean, I'm just a normal guy. Like I
Mhm.
make a pretty normal income. I'm not like in this ivory tower and live in this mini mansion and drive all these fancy Lamborghinis and cars. And, I'm a normal dude. And so I think we're by opening up and just being transparent about what we've been doing, the mistakes that we have made, it's helped other people say like, I'm not the only one, right?
Yeah.
I can do this too. So I think, you know getting yourself around these types of conversations,
Mhm.
start reading personal finance books, start listening to podcasts, jump into some of these social media groups where these people are having some different conversations about money and personal finance. And I think the more that you do that, you'll be more willing to open up and have some of those conversations. But it is such a hard thing to do. And I think that's one of the reasons also why our community here at Deaf Dad has thrived the way it has is because we there is a no judgment policy.
Mhm.
Everyone there, and this is crazy to me, but most people think like they're the only ones who've made their types of mistakes. And Shawn, I've been grateful to be able to coach thousands of people. I hardly hear from one person that of a mistake that they made that surprises me anymore because we all have a lot of the same types of mistakes in common. A lot of
Mhm.
us have made the same bad decisions. We made the same poor choices, but we can put ourselves kind of on this island like we're the only ones. And the reality is, a lot of other people are doing the same exact thing you are.
Yeah.
It's just that we're not talking about it.
Yeah. And so also to go back, like like that's really helpful, right? Because oftentimes we feel so isolated, we feel so alone, and you can talk about social media and all this other mumbo jumbo right now. But regardless of that, like just about anything you're going through, someone else has experienced at the same time. And
Yeah,
that's one of the biggest things I preach too, especially to a lot of men that I work with, is there's this really powerful thing that happens when you have a community behind you, right?
yeah,
Of people that are going through the same exact thing as you or someone that's already been through it, right?
yeah,
And so the more community that you can have, the better to a degree. And so one of the other things that you had started to mention was, teaching in the school system, teaching at home. I'm curious if you were to have a course or uh, a course that you run, right? You have courses. So what the question that I'm trying to say here, if you were a high school teacher, right, and you were teaching personal finance, what would the course be called, and what are you going to teach on day one?
day one is probably going to be all about behaviors, mindset, and your choices, right? It's just
Hmm.
is really fine tuning those because that's where I think a lot of this starts from on the foundational level. And really it kind of goes across the board in your entire life. You look at health and fitness, same thing.
Hmm.
Right? It's amazing how parallel those two things are, personal finance and health and fitness. A lot of it is it's the same types of discipline and commitment and consistency that you need on both sides to be successful. And sadly, if you look at the world and people struggle with both of those, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be a big part of it. Second one is going to be just about budgeting. I think budgeting gets a really bad rap. Budgeting today, if you use the word budget, it means you're broke. It means you're a penny pincher. It means that you're cheap. It means that you don't like to spend money. Or you're not living a fun life, right? And I think that that is just a complete false statement of what a budget truly is. It really is just a calculation of your expenditures and the income that you have coming in. And no
Hmm.
matter what the income is, and no matter what the expenditures are,
Yeah.
and I think we need to do away with this mindset that a budget is just it means you're not doing well,
Hmm.
right? So just teaching people proper budgeting skills, and then I think besides that, it would be kind of focusing on more of the holistic side or some of the more characteristics that you really need to be successful. Things like patience, along with delayed gratification,
Hmm.
and talking about how we live in a society where they teach us not to wait.
Hmm.
Get it now. Why would you wait?
Yeah.
You need this right now. And also probably bringing in even some of that, that marketing, how marketing makes us feel bad for what we have or what we don't have, how marketing makes us feel less adequate, and really giving people, especially these young kids, just the proper tools to understand how that stuff is being used against you to get you to spend money on stuff. So I think those would be the big things that I would focus on. And then obviously, big one is saving, talking about the power of compound interest in early investing.
Hmm.
Uh, I think this one is just, it should just be a requirement. Like when you get out of high school, like you need to have this set up. And so you could start investing, right? It's just, it's mind blowing to me how much wealth is missed. And some, people think wealth, you have to be so rich to be able to use that word wealth. You
Hmm.
don't. Like it can just start as a very small amount at a young age of 18 years old and just doing it consistently year after year until you're ready to retire. And you could amass this amazing amount of wealth where you would be able to pass it down to your kids and all
Yeah.
this amazing stuff. But it's just that we're not being taught those things. We're being taught to consume. We're
Yeah.
being taught to go into debt, and we have to flip that script. And I think so that those would be probably the big things that I would focus on in that class.
Yeah. Now, regardless of like the just having the emergency fund for saving, now either for you personally or a lot of the students, what is the reason behind saving? Is this just to make sure that you're financially secure when you retire? Is this to actually have something to go and pass down? what is the real end all be all goal to saving?
So obviously I look at saving as just, for what you would need right now.
Mhm.
Saving like your emergency fund is for emergencies, or if you want to use the word sinking funds. Sinking funds is basically a savings goal for something that's going to be in the near future, and you're breaking it down incrementally in your budget and saving for it monthly. Christmas is a perfect example, right? That would be a great sinking fund because it comes up every year. Let's just put away money every single month. As far as your investing, I mean, it really kind of depends. I mean, this is where it gets kind of fun. You get to pull out the crayons, you get to pull out the paper and kind of color what you want. What does that look like to you? And a lot of people say, well, what's the ideal amount that I should have in retirement savings in order to live? Well, I don't know. Do you want to live in a camper and travel around the country and just chill out in campgrounds and national parks and go see things? Or do you want to live in some luxurious, condominium place in a retirement community? Like I
Yeah.
don't know what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
But I think, as individuals, we need to focus on what that is. But when it comes to saving and investing, I think, investing to me is more long term. What
Mhm.
is, things I'm saving for well out into the future.
Mhm.
Saving for right now are going to be things like from 1 to 5 years.
Yeah. And now one of the things that stuck out to me here as well is where was I going with this? It's one of those things where you had something right on the tip of your tongue, right?
No, that's
Uh, um,
I hate when that happens.
I know. It was such a good question too, and it happens, like we're human. Oh, here's where I was going because it's deeper, right? And so, why do you think it's so difficult for people to actually go and express and say what they want, right? I think that that's a lot of the basis of what we're talking about now, and how to get out of debt, and how why is it so difficult for people to actually express what they want and what they need?
Well, I'll speak from this from a personal standpoint.
Hmm.
Because it's hard. It's hard to sit down and really look within yourself. There's some scary things in there,
Yeah.
about who we are and what we are and what we want. And I think a lot of us tend to avoid that. And
Mhm.
I know I have, and I still do at times, but
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things that I did, Sean, that really kind of got me out of debt was, and I still have this journal today. Um, I go back to this, and I had written down what my ideal life would look like, what my job would look like, the characteristics of it, what do I want to do every day, just everything that I wanted. And I go back and I look at that, and today, outside of a few ups and downs in my life, which I've had plenty, I have the majority of those things in my life today.
Hmm.
Um, but it took me a lot of time and a lot of like just really looking inside myself about what I truly wanted. And I think sometimes that can be a scary thing because then we start to realize and we start to look at what we actually do have and how far away we are actually of that. And I think for a lot of people that's just too much. Like they say like I have these dreams. A lot of people give up on their dreams because they're just like, why even bother even focusing on that? Because I'll never get there. Um, but the reality is that you can get there. Does it take time? Does it take a heck of a lot of work? Yes, it sure does. But for me, I think that was the biggest thing of overcoming is just the fear of what I was going to find once I started really kind of figuring out what I was that I truly wanted, and then really facing the facts of here's what I really need to do in order to get there. And getting my finances in order was top of the list because it's not to say that money is the most important, but it is such an important tool to help you get to what you want to go.
Yeah. And to go off of that, I think it's you need to be able to give yourself permission to go and do that. And when you can actually go and evaluate and say, "Hey, this is what I actually want," it's much easier to go and lay out those action steps that you need to take for it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? That's one of the biggest things because if you just say, "Yeah, well, I want something better than it is now." All right, well, I want more money than I have now. All right, well, here's a dollar. You got more money than you have now. It's
Yeah.
it's easy to go and say that, but when it's really clear, it's a lot easier to go and take the action steps.
Yeah.
And so, Brad, before we get into our last question here, if you could just share like where we can find you or work with you. I know you've got a ton of the free courses and ebooks and things like that. So just share some of those for us quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the best things you could do is, if you're just interested in having, more of these conversations about money on all different types of topics, I would check out the Debt Free Dad podcast. We have well over 250 episodes. We release 2 episodes per week now on that show, and we're just normal everyday people again. All of us have had our own personal finance challenges, and we all had our own journey. We've got quite a group of hosts that are on our show, and it's an amazing place to hear about normal everyday people that are doing things differently. And I think for if you're a middle income earner, middle to higher income earner, and you're looking for something different, you're tired of financial stress, and you want something different, I think this is just a great place to start. Obviously, you go to our website too, like Shawn said, you go to debt-free-dad.com. We got quite a few different free workshops there, some really inexpensive budgeting workshops there. But I would highly recommend checking out the podcast, because I think for most of our listeners, that's where they get their start. And not only are you going to hear from us, but you're also going to hear from other normal everyday people who are doing the stuff that we're talking about on that show. And you're going to hear their story. You're going to hear some of the stuff that they're doing. And the cool part is you're going to be able to take that stuff away and actually apply it to your own life, and start to get some much better results.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is actually applying it. It's one thing to take in all the information, but unless it's integrated, then it's it's like you didn't really do anything. You can have all the
Right.
knowledge in the world, but it's just you're going to get much farther, because I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but when you go and take just a couple of action steps, things can really start to snowball and you build a lot of momentum there.
You got it.
You,
Yep.
you
And
know,
sometimes it's just the small steps too. It doesn't have to be massive, giant leaps you got to take it. It's
Mhm.
just taking those little tiny steps every day. It's amazing what you can do, what you can do and where you can go just by doing that.
Yeah. So, Brad, our last question comes from the last guest. And so this is from Nikki Odea. And what do you think is the coolest thing about being a human in 2024?
Being a human in 2024. Me personally, I would say this amazing thing called the internet. Um, because again, I get that there's a lot of negative things about the internet. There could be a
Yep.
lot of negative things, but the coolest part I love about it is that I've been able to connect with so many people all over the world with our message, podcasting, our program. It's just been an amazing outlet, and I am always grateful for it, because I'll get messages from people from Australia or Europe or Canada, or it's so cool to be able to hear back from these individuals and say, "Hey, I heard this and this really helped me." And it's like, I don't think, you don't quite grasp how much you can help so many people. Even if you think like you're just a normal everyday person, like I am, you can help so many people with some of the things that you struggle with and overcame with. And I think to me, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Brad, I appreciate you joining me. Um, Thank you very much. Make sure that you guys check out Brad and his resources and his podcast. And I know that this is going to be real helpful for a lot of people here.
Hey, thanks, Sean. Appreciate it, man.